Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Welcome to episode 282. What if choosing a technical specialty made you miss being more of a generalist? In Amy Arnold's case, she made a decision to go and work for a consulting firm to build a deep expertise in voice over IP. But after a time, she found that she was missing all the networking things. What do you do when that happens? Well, the only way to answer that question is to share part 2 of Amy's story, which we're going to do this week. But before I tell you more, let's recap part 1 of Amy's story in episode 281. If you recall, Amy was a pre-law program dropout after 5 days. In fact, she decided to take some courses on networking until something just clicked. Some of her first technology jobs were more systems administration focused. Amy shared her work experience in the public sector, some of the nuances, and why she's passionate about the public sector. This week in part 2, we'll pick it up right as Amy starts to talk through the reasons she decided to move back to working in the public sector after going to the consulting firm. She'll talk about what it takes to make the move from troubleshooter of systems to architect of systems. We'll also get to hear how Amy applied her project management skills across her role as a network engineer in the public sector, her role as a consultant, and also in her role at Fortinet as a pre-sales systems engineer. So here we go with part 2 of our discussion with Amy Arnold.
It's a great experience. You learn how to talk to customers and you see a lot of different environments. You learn what works really well, what maybe doesn't work really well. You meet a lot of different people. You do a lot of different things.
Did your project management training help you when you went through this type of job?
Absolutely. And I will say, honestly, my project management, as much as I did not like being a project manager in a formal role, that project management methodology, just being able to manage your own projects, is essential to network engineering, but especially being a consultant. You have to have a plan. You're working on someone else's stuff, and they're going to be really mad if you mess it up. So you really have to talk about timelines. You have to talk about deliverables. You have to talk about expectations. You have to talk about all of those things, and you have to plot it out and who's doing what, because you're dependent, especially in voice. The network has to be in before you can do a voice deployment, right? These sorts of things that you have to plan and work with others and make sure that you're doing things in the timeline that the customer has and the timeline that your coworkers that are maybe working projects at the same site are doing. Those skills are invaluable. I mean, those communication skills and those project planning skills, they're essential.
And when we say consultant, does that mean pre-sales, post-sales, or maybe both?
So the consultant place that I worked at, it was both. You got to sell it to them and then you got to implement it for them. Mine was a small medium reseller. A lot of the larger ones, you can be a pre-sales or post-sales, and there's a distinction. But a lot of the medium to small ones, you are wearing all the hats. You were doing all the things.
And was that your kind of first exposure to the pre-sale side of things?
Yeah, from an official pre-sales, I think the closest experience I had working a municipal government was selling my projects to city management and to departments. which was not quite the same, right? You're not having to do a quote and, a scope of work for that necessarily. But yeah, that would be my first, working the pre-sales aspect and sitting down in front of customers and gathering the official requirements, all things it did on a smaller scale and local gov, but doing this for customers of different enterprises.
I'm wondering, as somebody who's a manager now, I manage a pre-sales team. Would you have appreciated a manager managing you with the project management framework or methodology?
It depends. I keep always saying that. We did have management, right? And there was a project manager that would get assigned to very large projects. But to be completely honest, I kind of like being the master of my own destiny and understanding that. But I do think that there are some folks that are in that role who don't have that skill set or do not enjoy that. They want somebody to tell them when and where they need to be and what they need to do and be managed more closely like that. I don't think that's necessarily micromanaging, but they just want to be responsible for the tech. Tell me when to show up. I actually enjoy having a little more control over how things go. So I think that it appeals to some. I don't know, depending on what it was. If it came off more like the micromanaging, I probably wouldn't love it so much.
The way you describe it feels a little bit more of the way that an account manager for a customer might manage a person from a pool of pre-sales engineers. So if a person who's a pre-sales engineer doesn't have a consistent touch with a specific customer, they own the customer technical relationship as well as, the opportunity technical relationship, then maybe the account manager is a little bit more responsible for providing a little bit more of that project management. Although, again, maybe an account manager is like, hey, here's my timeline until they need it going live by this date. Therefore, here's, user acceptance is this many days and implementation is this many days and technical validation is this many days. So we needed to start a week ago.
Exactly. I think it also depends on the workload. If you are overwhelmed with all of the technical things that you need to do, it's way welcoming to have somebody else handle all the other stuff. If you're doing post-sales and pre-sales and all the things. So I do think that there is some benefit to having somebody who's in charge of all of that other stuff. And just tell me where to show up, right? Especially where I found project management to be useful when we'd have one assigned would be when you got to coordinate with a bunch of different people. I don't want to be calling them, finding out if they're going to show up, if they're ready to go. It's nice when someone else is doing that. As far as project plans and things like that, I prefer to do those myself. I like to know that if I'm doing an implementation. Now I'm all pre-sales now, so I don't have to necessarily come up with a detailed project implementation plan the way a PS would have to. But I do think that project managers, the ones that I've seen that have really shown value, is in being able to do that and being able to help you when things are overwhelmed, that you're like, something's got to get dropped. What is it going to be? What can we do?
It sounds like the way you're describing that role when it's externalized from the technologist is the person who's handling the logistics of the people and the process. That is where they're solely focused and they're no longer focused on the technology. It's almost like they just own the status of the timeline and all of the meetings that need to happen and activities that need to happen, to meet that timeline. Am I on track there?
Exactly. I think those have been the project managers that I have worked with that I've valued the most have been the ones that can handle that and take care of that. And if somebody's got to call in sick or they're not ready to go and got to find somebody else or something like that, I don't want to deal with that. I want somebody else to deal with that.
Right. Or there are this many hours left kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'll freely disclose that I found the idea of getting that PMP, the project management professional, that kind of pricked my ears. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder which skills there would help a technologist along in their career. So, maybe I'll keep on circling back on that topic to ask, like, hey, maybe, somebody who's a technologist doesn't need to go and get the full like PMP certification, but if you got like the project management, what is it, the Book of Knowledge or something like that?
The PMBOK. It's been a while since I've done that, but yeah, there's a PMBOK. It's the project management Bible, that's out there.
Maybe there's certain sections. It's like, hey, if you know this skill and this skill and this skill, like that is going to serve you well, throughout your career in technology, even if your primary job skill is, not managing projects.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of stuff that's in the project management certification that you won't really have to do very often. Like calculating critical path is like fancy for, let's just make sure that we can get everything done in enough time when there's dependencies on other people.
But sometimes just knowing that critical path is, we have this like hazy box right here, and then something magical happens, and then somebody makes a decision, right? And
yes.
that understanding that you have that risk there is like a big deal.
You said a great word, the risk. That's the other thing that the project management certification spends some time on is what's the risk if you fail? What's the risk if this thing slips? And so those are really great concepts. There's some really tedious verbiage and definitions that they throw at you in that certification that you don't necessarily, I don't know that you would find it valuable as a network engineer or systems engineer or cloud engineer. But the concepts, like you said, being able to know what is the drop dead date, who are we relying on, and how, what is the risk if this thing doesn't get done? Those are really great concepts.
So following this train of thought on the project management, you went from making a case for a project at a local municipality to the people who could say yes or no, to the one helping someone or who did a job that you kind of used to do, put that project plan together, scope it out, maybe building an architecture. Can you describe for us the progression of skill sets needed to go from the troubleshooter of things and systems to the architect of things and systems? Because you have to be able to build something like that for these projects. And it may be like a new location, right? Or around one specific system, or we're going to replace all our switches this year. How do we need to design it? I'm just really curious how not only the network engineer, but others can make that shift to, I need to think about the systematic architectural implications of this thing.
I think there's a reason that solution architect roles are usually at the top of the advancement in career, is because it takes some time and you need to see some things before you really understand why this is best practice or why things are designed this way. Some of it is just book knowledge. This is how things should be architected, right? Like this solution requires like a voice world, publisher here, subscriber here, latency of this amount, things like that. You can just know that. But to really design a solution that meets people's needs, that's addressing the problems that they have or the things that they're going to encounter, takes more than just, I understand how VRRP works and failover. You're really going to have to understand what they want to fail over. When do they want to fail? Like under what circumstances will failure happen? What are the different things that might fail if this fails? And designing for those particular problems, I think takes time and practice. And I don't know that I could ever mark a place in my career where I was just like, today I got it. Like today I'm an architect. But I think that after a couple of years, maybe 2 to 3 years, you really started to, I know what this is. I know what I'm going to find out. And this is how it should be designed. And then when you come into situations that you don't know particularly well, being able to ask those questions and think through how it needs to be designed, those are things that you're falling back on that experience. and that practice. And a lot of it's reading too. There's a lot of great networking textbooks and blog posts and videos and learning from all of those. And I would say that definitely helped me get there sooner.
That's really good. I love the building the muscles of thought and curiosity based on exposure to different things. Just like before, the exposure to things to determine what we like and what we don't. Because for you, Amy, you got to be a consultant and be on the pre-sale side and the post-sale side. Those can be quite different, but I imagine maybe there was one side you liked more than the other. I'm just really curious, what made you want to go from doing both to having to pick one?
That is an interesting question because I actually really liked both sides of the equation, designing it and implementing it. But one of the reasons I went back to the city that I had worked for was because I was missing doing all the networking things. I was doing voice as a consultant, was good at it, had developed a lot of skills to be able to do that. But I missed being able to see the whole network and work on routing and switching and wireless and voice and all of those, build those cohesive solutions. And I honestly, in my career, that's one of the things I like about my current role is that I'm fully pre-sales. I do not have a production that I could wreck, which is great, but I have a lab in which I get to tinker and configure and try things and break my own stuff. So I really equally like both of those roles. I like being able to design it, and I don't necessarily want to be like, hey, I never want to sit at a CLI and configure anything or and do anything. I actually like being able to test some theories or do some things. And that's for me personally. I do think there are some that move into that architecture role and they're like, I am never touching that's somebody else. That's PS now. I'm designing it only. Y'all implement it. I've always been I still want to tinker kind of person, even in a solutions architect type role.
If you do too much of the former and not enough of the other, then you start ending up with, I don't remember what the phrase is exactly, but it's something along the lines of throw the pig over the fence. Right? It's like,
yes.
Here's the design.
Yeah.
You guys go do it.
PS is like, what? They want to throw it right back. Yeah, I agree. Because one of the reasons that you're able to design solutions well is because you've implemented them and seen what doesn't work. Too, you're like, don't do that. There's a reason we don't do it that way. It's for reasons, right? And not every reason you have to test out in your lab, but some things you have to be like, wait, is this going to work the way I want it to? Is this it just vet out actual theory, so that you're not all theory and no practice.
It's an interesting parallel to something that you said earlier, which was the most well-rounded network engineers that you've seen started in help desk, right? So that's a role where you see things go wrong in multiple different ways. And if you've ever done a post-sales network engineering role where you're implementing somebody else's architecture, then you get to see a lot of the ways that a pre-sales architecture can go wrong without enough, definition and depth. That's an interesting parallel that I think that I hadn't thought about until, you didn't exactly articulate it that way, but it's like a pattern that, my brain jumped to that I hadn't really thought before. That's not a question. Sorry.
You articulated that very well.
We call that the John White effect, where John just throws something out and doesn't ask a question.
It's the John White method. It's how not to succeed at interviewing.
It's excellent observation.
I was about to ask about progression, this kind of next transition back from a consultancy back to the public sector job that you had, and then that kind of next step, that next transition, you made a transition away from public sector, directly working for a public sector organization, again, back into more of a dedicated pre-sales role. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk through the process of what made you want to do that. You just expressed going back to that role as, oh, I get to work kind of across the full spectrum of network engineering. And now you're working at Fortinet. So what was it that kind of made you interested in this opportunity to kind of step away from being responsible, or at least know and touch like everything, and be a little bit more, again, step into that pre-sales role?
I'd done a very long stint back at local gov. And, I was kind of getting to a point where I'd kind of seen a lot of things and was feeling like it might be time to do a little something different. There was a SLED role in DFW for Fortinet, and I had done a ton of Fortinet FortiGate projects over the years. I think my first FortiGate I worked on was I think it's 15 years or so ago. So I'd done a lot of those and enjoyed those projects quite a bit. And so I really like the SLED mission, public sector mission. People kind of laugh at that because not everyone loves public sector work for many reasons. One of those being you don't tend to get paid all that well in public sector. But I do really like that mission, and I've been fortunate in my career to be able to do that. So a SLED role seemed perfect for me. And I applied and have been at Fortinet for 4 years. And I love it because it's actually, so Fortinet has, I always joke, they have all the Forti things. And so I'm still doing wireless, route switch, security. There's even some voice in there. I'm doing all of that. So I'm still getting to do the things that I love, but nobody is calling me at 3 a.m. because I can't rec production. It's a really nice balance of being able to do solutions architect, still be hands-on, still get into that holistic view, and it's security first. Whereas I don't know, most of y'all coming up in networking, security was an afterthought for good beginning part of the career, right? Like nobody thought about security the way they think about security today. It's a really cool opportunity to be able to do that. And it feels like a nice culmination of the different things that I've done in my career to have this role.
The idea of not getting calls in the middle of the night is a nice thing. There's no doubt about that.
It is. I've done my share of on-call.
Mm-hmm.
Done my share of, getting the late night call. Yeah. So it is kind of nice to not have, the network monitoring system sending you emails constantly about things you need to fix. Now it's just my own stuff I break.
How would you compare working for a technology vendor to working for the consulting firm in terms of maybe some of the responsibilities and nuances of what you do? I mean, we know about the pre and post sales division from the consulting firm before, but are there some specific nuances that maybe you didn't expect at a technology vendor that are a bit different than the consultant life?
So I don't know about didn't expect, but definitely that is a little bit different is that I'm used to being on the consulting side and dealing with a lot of vendors potentially. And now I am on the vendor side dealing with a lot of partners, resellers, and you're not their only focus. And so you have to be like, hi, hello, let me help you sell more things that have the Fortinet logo on them, right? Let me enable you to do that. And so it's kind of an interesting role because customers are my primary focus, right? Like I am directly interfacing with the customer, but partners are part of that equation, right? So you now have these two relationships that you need to maintain, and you have to help your partner understand what your customer is trying to say if they're not getting it, and you have to kind of make sure that they're being looked after. And it's just an interesting relationship from that perspective. It's cool because I have already been on the partner side. So the concept of channel and selling to the channel and what those roles look like and all of that and what's going on over on the other side of the fence, I've been there. So that's kind of the nice part about being in SLED is I've been on the customer side of the fence and the partner side of the fence. So it helps me kind of understand motivations and kind of know where I need to focus my energy.
Can we just clarify, when you say partner, I'm assuming you mean a firm or company that has the ability to resell your vendor technologies and or maybe do professional services for setting that up, configuring it, that kind of thing. Is that generally accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it goes by different names. Some a channel, partner, consulting, reseller, VAR. Yeah. I use those kind of interchangeably, but that's a good point. Yes.
Just in case someone listening didn't know. That's always a fun one.
No, that's a good point.
It's funny. And I think when I said consultancy, I was more thinking about like a systems integrator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like an Accenture or a PwC, kind of on the national, international, global scale. But those types of firms, exist on a smaller, like more boutique scale, which would probably fit into that partner channel as well, where they're mostly doing advisory and implementation and operational stuff, but not necessarily taking a part in the resale. Although maybe that's not true.
Yeah, typically the partners that I work with, they're resellers. Most of them can do PS, not all of them. Some of them will outsource PS to Fortinet themselves or to a company that only does PS. But yeah, generally they'll resell that. And then obviously, like with partners, with vendors, there's always that you got to be certified to sell the thing for the PS and things like that. So just being part of that, we have people who their job is to work with the partners with the channel to make sure that they, give them that enablement training. But that's also something that we do on the SE side is work with local SEs at partners to help them as well.
Just wanted to say PS. When you say PS, you mean professional services.
Implementation
Services, but sometimes also like I've heard that term used for like large scale architectural services as well. Like, oh, this is going to be like a, 40 location build out and we actually need to pay an architect to come in and, own the thing, kind of the umbrella of professional services.
Yes, it's definitely both. And then there are some partners of ours that will loan out engineers to bigger companies and things like that as on-site PS, and they're really just almost like contracting at that point for that person. So yeah, definitely all of those.
That I've heard as like staff augmentation.
Yes, staff augmentation.
Or a residency. Sometimes it's called that too.
So I will ask the question which I promised earlier, which was the PMP skills. How have those helped, if at all, in the pre-sales part of your work now? Well, I guess all of the work now.
I should never be surprised at how skills you pick up along the way. It's amazing to me how they get used later in your career. And PMP is one of those because especially in a pre-sales role like I have, there is very little micromanaging. You're doing your job. You're not sitting in an office with a bunch of other SEs. I happen to be paired one-to-one with an account manager that I work with daily, but how I get stuff done is on me. Like I need to get my training done. I mean, obviously I'm going to have customer appointments. I'm going to have appointments with partners, with resellers. There's going to be all sorts of training that I need to do. There's nobody watching. There's nobody looking at the clock saying, you've clocked in now, work your 8 hours, clock out. It's a very unstructured type of job. So there are some weeks where I get more training in on things. And then there's some weeks where training didn't happen, but a ton of meetings did or something like that. So it's really about keeping up with your follow-up, keeping up with your customers, making sure that if you just deployed something out there, you're checking on them and they're good, right? If they just bought something that they're not sitting over there stewing because they can't make it work or the partner's is having some issues. It's a lot of people management. It's a lot of project management and study plan management, and nobody's telling you how to do it and when or how much time you need to spend on anything. So all of that PMP skills is, okay, here's the things I need to accomplish. Here are the things that have to get done by when, and you really have to be a good planner to do it.
Do you use project management techniques to help you communicate with your manager?
I don't know if I use project management techniques, although it kind of falls under the communication aspect of project management, where you have regular check-ins. But I do have regular check-ins with my manager. So I'm not managed by the account manager I work with, they have different leadership. So I have check-ins with my account manager that I'm paired with. And then I have check-ins with my manager every so often just to make sure everything's good. And then, we'll have some team check-ins occasionally that are less official. But it's that communication bit of it that I don't know that that's necessarily only a PMP skill, but it's one that makes me not so sad. I majored in arts and humanities, which is my bachelor's degree is in arts and humanities, which means I can write a lot and communicate, and it served me well. I don't know that I would necessarily change that, but it is one of those things where when I had an arts and humanities degree and was a law school dropout, I was like, what am I going to do with this? And now through all of the different jobs I've had, I realize how important it is to be able to communicate, speak, gather requirements, put things into an orderly thing that people can understand. Absolutely vital.
I'd love to, as much as I was talking about PMP earlier, I'd love to chase that down as a skill now that you've brought it up, the writing and communication. I came across this paper, or maybe it was just like a generic thought that's floating out there that people have brought up, which is writing is really effective thought. If you just have a thought and it's not recorded and never refined and never examined, then that's not really effective thinking. It's when it's written and communicated to be examined by yourself in the future, other people, that is where real thought is occurring. So you just mentioned, the skill of writing and communication has been something that's been extremely important in this technical career. And I'm wondering if that rings any bells for you, that, writing is where effective thought happens.
I completely agree. When I started blogging, but it was actually someone in the community that encouraged me to do it. One of the reasons I did was to really get thoughts down in a clear way and remember those things. One, I won't remember it later if I don't write it down. It's one of the lies I tell myself is I'll remember this later and then realize no, I didn't remember it later. But being able to really go through and write something down, even if it's just for yourself, you really you have to understand it to write it. And when you write it and it's not making sense, you got to rewrite it until you really understand what you're doing. And so I really find writing stuff down is a really effective for me for studying. I still physically write notes. I haven't blogged in a little while. I feel a little guilty about that. But blogging, writing, even if I don't send it to a customer, writing up notes, whatever note app you have is really effective. Not just because it helps with memory issues, right? Later you're like, what did I actually say? What were we actually doing? But to really help you understand and see, get those concepts down, especially when you're blogging about something that is a concept oriented type of thing. It's really helpful.
And how has the being a blogger been looked upon in you seeking out interviews for different jobs? I mean, it sounds like you've been doing that for a while. So was that something you promoted and leveraged in the job interview for Fortinet or previous endeavors as a way to say, hey, listen, I know how to effectively communicate and here's where you can go read about it?
Yeah. So I did not start blogging for that purpose, but it was super cool when I applied at Fortinet and the hiring manager called me and was like, yeah, I've read your blog. It made the job interview process pretty darn smooth from that perspective. So I definitely encourage people getting started. Not everyone wants to have a social media presence. Not everyone wants to write a blog, and maybe not everyone should, but I do encourage them to try to, even if it's just to write their own notes in their own format. I think that people should have the courage and just blog or find some method of communicating, giving back to the community instead of, just necessarily just absorbing everything. Not that absorbing things is wrong, and that's great. That's been so much of my career is absorbing the knowledge of others that they put out there. But that's one of the reasons I think that people should, and because you really do have to know yourself. If you want to find a mistake in your blog post, just hit publish. You'll find it. It's one of those things where you really do want to start figuring out ways to be coherent in your thinking. Like if you really think you want to do pre-sales, you have to be able to be put in front of a customer. And I have known so many network engineers who are brilliant, but they can't hold a conversation. They can't talk to the customer. They're uncomfortable. They look down. They can't ask questions. And that is something that even though, and maybe this podcast doesn't show it, I'm completely introverted. Completely. I do so many extroverted things. It's insane, but you have to do that in this field. Or I think you should do that in this field. I think that you find that the community is worth it.
And if I am someone who has thought about blogging, maybe a little bit nervous about it, as you said, if you want to find out something's wrong, just hit publish. Do I have to be someone that publishes like 3 times a week or 3 times a month? Or what do you think about that?
I think that you should write what you find to be interesting. Either if it's what you're learning, if it's a story you have to tell. I haven't blogged in a while, but when I did blog more consistently, it was still only maybe once a month. That's all I had time for. But I would have these really interesting stories that I'd run into, and those made for great blog posts to bring up different concepts or different things that I got thrown into the deep end of voice as a network engineer, and I figured I probably wasn't the only one. So most of my posts were, okay, so if you are similar in this, maybe you don't know this either, I'm going to throw it out there. And it goes through stages too, and it doesn't have to just be blogging. It can be just getting involved in a networking user group or posting in a Slack or a Discord more regularly, helping people, community forums. But it's good to get that writing. Like you said, that's how you're really evaluating those thoughts, right? If you have to write it down, you're going to take some time to make sure it's right, hopefully, or at least assumingly, like, this is my best effort. I think this is right. Y'all be nice. If I'm wrong, correct me, try to be nice.
I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I feel like every time I write something for LinkedIn about a podcast we've done, for example, I write down something and I go, man, why couldn't I have had this observation when I recorded the intro or when we were doing the interview with the person?
Yeah. But I do think that doesn't mean that Twitter is for everyone or whatever people are doing, Discord or Slack. I'm a slacker, man. I'm in a lot of Slack groups and I'm not good at it. But I do think you should find that thing that gets you into a community that you are doing something to pay it forward, being able to leverage that knowledge that you're getting. Maybe it's mentoring people. And I know that sounds silly, but 2 of the women I'm mentoring, they're both at about the same stage and they're helping each other study. So, I mean, there's just, even if you're just getting started, there are still ways that you can engage with the material and with the people so that you're really propelling yourself forward and bringing people along with you.
It's community, it's support, it's accountability. Sometimes there's a lot of different roles that can play. I really like that. If nothing else, you can keep it completely private and it's a personal knowledge store. I happen to have a blog that I've kept, infrequently, but, early on when I was writing a little bit more about my learning journey, like the number of times that I would search for something and then find a blog post that I wrote, which is kind of a common story among people who are blogging. They go, oh yeah, I have done this before and I did solve it and here's how I did it. And I mean, I've seen questions on certification exams and I was like, oh, I wrote a blog post about tripping over this and here it is, apparently it was a rite of passage enough that now it's a certification exam question. It wasn't
That's
just
awesome.
me. So
That's awesome.
I'll raise my hand and say me too. I agree.
Well, I think you made a really good point that it is, even if you keep it to yourself, you're still doing yourself a favor to do it. And it is really nervous. And if people feel really nervous about putting themselves out there, they should know that everyone feels really nervous about putting themselves out there. But the community, by and large, the networking community is super supportive. Obviously, if you're going to ask a question, you should probably Google it first before don't make people do your work for you. But if you show any true intent of, I just want to understand this, they're always reaching out and helping. So I think you make a great point.
One more thing I want to make sure we uncover, because we're getting close to the end of our recording time here, Amy. You talked about being a member of the advisory board for the program you went through early on. You talked about being one of the leaders of the Dallas-Fort Worth networking user group. You talked about the value of community for other people, but I don't actually think we captured what lit the flame for you originally when it came to, I should be involved in a technical community. Because I heard you say earlier you were starting to seek out other network engineers, but what made it click, and how did you find technical communities in the beginning?
I've had a lot of success in my career that I would love to say was I planned it that way completely. And that's just not entirely true. When I started working in public sector, being the only network engineer, I started trying to find ways to connect with people who knew networking so I could learn from them, basically be a sponge. And this was back quite a few years ago when Twitter wasn't quite the entity it is now, but there was a lot of networking people, including Ethan, Tom Hollingsworth. I think they've both been on the show, all of those folks. And I started following them. We started meeting up at Cisco Live, being part of the group and, contributing to that. And I found that it was really valuable. I learned so many things that would have taken me so many more years to have gotten on my own. And so I just encourage people to do that, even if it is super uncomfortable, because pretty much everyone in this industry is an introvert. I know not every single one is, but there's a really high percentage of them. And so you're really just kind of in the room with a bunch of people that are nervous about being in the room too. And you just kind of have to own that and be awkward. I remember going up to people that I knew from Twitter and just going, "Hi, I follow you. And I think you're really cool. I want to introduce myself." And that is so awkward, but you should do it. And it's rewarding. You get so much information from listening. And then if you're contributing to you, it's just a really good way to be in this industry, even if it is a little against our introverted nature.
And is that the proper forum that people should leverage to seek out mentorship? Or is there some other avenue?
It depends on what you're seeking out in a mentorship. Advice, I often see that more in Slack channels, Discords that are networking related. Art of Network Engineering has a Discord. Several do. Those are all good. And you see a lot of people asking for advice there. And that's probably a better forum there. I have people reach out to me on LinkedIn and ask me questions and things like that. And I'm happy to do that. The people I actually mentor here, they're local. And that's a different level of mentoring because we go and we have lunch and we talk and they ask questions and we can do those sorts of things. It just depends on what engagement. I just wouldn't randomly, find somebody on Twitter and say, "Be my mentor. I don't even know you." I would probably try to build a relationship first before I would say, if you're looking for that deeper level of mentorship. If you're just looking for advice though, lots of people have been willing to give just general advice, but it is a little not quite the best format to do it. And it's not just Twitter anymore, Mastodon and, and Threads and Blue Sky. It's everyone's kind of shuffled off into different areas. But I think LinkedIn has become a common place for people to do that.
Amy, I just really appreciate the time and effort that you've spent here kind of going over your career journey and us, listening and trying to gain some insight on the lessons that you've learned over this time and some of the recommendations that you've made. Just really appreciate it. And thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to do this and get to talk to you guys. Y'all are awesome.
I really enjoy hearing discussions of people who have gone and pursued a specialty and then done something more general and the reasons for making those shifts. We already talked about Amy's fast filter and her ability to detect when something is not the right thing for her. In this case, she wanted to go be a specialist. She wanted to develop that deep expertise in something. That something was voice over IP. She did enjoy the time she spent, but after a time, it was more important to her to focus on more of the aspects of networking because it was more interesting and she thought she would enjoy it more. That spirit of technical exploration that was present in part 1 of our discussion was still there. It's been there throughout this entire story. So just remember, if you decide to go and pursue a specialty, it doesn't have to be forever. It can be for a specific amount of time. You might not know what that amount of time is when you decide to pursue it, but perhaps while you're in it, you can figure out if it's still the right thing for you or if maybe the focus is too narrow. And if it is, that's okay. You can make a shift. When John was asking the questions about project management skills and those things that would help a technologist in their career, it reminded me a lot of episode 234 with Josh Duffney and the way he was thinking about writing a book on the Go programming language. In that episode, we talked about structuring a book like that in such a way that someone could read it and build something useful in that programming language. I think John's taking the same approach in his lines of questions about project management. What could someone leverage from project management skills and that discipline to hit the ground running and start providing value with those skills quickly? It's almost like a Cliff Notes version, if you will, but it's the Cliff Notes for the most valuable skills that would apply to the technologist specifically in this case. I liked our discussion of the importance of communication skills. That's coming up a lot with guests, not only in spoken communication, but also the written communication. Writing what we find interesting. We can do that in a blog, as Amy talked about. We can do it in a community post. Maybe you don't have a blog. Maybe you just want to put it in an online forum, something you're thinking about. That's a fast way to get feedback because comment sections will light up if it's interesting enough to others. It could be in a Slack group or a Discord. That's still writing, that's still thinking, getting your thoughts out somewhere. I know that we spoke about Amy's blog being proof of work and being something that the hiring manager at Fortinet found and had read. That's a wonderful thing, and I would 100% advocate public proof of work for everybody. Just remember, public proof of work can be a blog, it can be a podcast, it can be videos, but it can also be community forum participation. It is possible that someone might read a well thought out post that you put in some online technical community. Maybe it's even in a Reddit thread. Anything that's out there that's digitized, that you've written, that's publicly accessible is proof of work and proof of your ability to produce effective thoughts. I hope you enjoyed Amy's story. I want to give a quick shout out to listeners in Finland, Poland, Germany, and Singapore for putting us on the Apple Podcast charts in the careers category. And I will say, if you're someone out there listening who enjoyed this episode, enjoyed the type of discussions we're having, I'd love for you to rate us 5 stars, write a review about what you enjoy about the show and the value it brings to you. And if you do write a review, send us a screenshot and we'll send you some stickers. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. Be happy to do that for you. We'll see you next week.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.